Hello, yeah. Good morning. So, we all attend school, correct? What if I tell you that 13.3% of our lives by the time we're 18 would have been spent on formal education alone? That might not seem like a huge number, but that's the only time we're spending intentionally learning. What about the rest of the time? To understand this, we have to recognize that there are three fundamental forms of learning outside of formal education that are inevitably ingrained into our daily lives. The first is conversing with others. So that's talking to your family, friends, getting advice, etc. The second is interacting with the environment. So maybe taking your dogs out on a walk or a cultural experience, celebrating a festival, any of that. And third, which is a newer occurrence that's particular to our generation, I would say, is social media. So scrolling posts, viewing websites, browsing articles, any of that. All of these contribute to our learning journey. And of course, it can be contested, like the validity of this can be contested. But we have to understand that what we construed as learning differs from person to person. And what one person may consider learning might not resonate with another. But our brains still function the same way. We're still in a constant state of processing and acquiring knowledge all of the time, even the smallest details like a bird chirping outside. But for the sake of this speech and discussion, we will consider learning in the state where we are aware of it. So what exactly is unlearning? By definition, it is the elimination of obsolete knowledge. The key term obsolete means knowledge that's out of date, so it's not useful anymore. So I'll tell you a story. One time, a friend of mine went to London and he came back with bags of chocolates, and they were UK branded, so it's not stuff you find in India. I was really excited. I wanted to eat some. I did have one, and then I was gonna put the rest of it in the fridge. But then when I opened the fridge, it was completely full of other food items, so I just left it at the kitchen counter, and I thought I'd do it later. But then I forgot, and then the next morning when I woke up and I saw it, there were tiny bits and pieces, and I realized that a rat had eaten it, and I was so sad. But the lesson from this is like the fridge, our brains do not expand. They just form new connections. So in order to put in something, you'd have to remove something. I would have to remove the vegetables for me to be able to put in the chocolates. Now, back to unlearning, think of it as mental decluttering. It is acknowledging that sometimes the things we accepted as the truth earlier might not hold rationality in our current context. And there's a common misconception that unlearning involves forgetting a lot or disregarding our past experiences, but that's not true at all. In reality, it's just about challenging actively what assumptions you may already have and shedding them in order to replace them with newer perspectives and that's relevant to where we currently stand. Now, why should we unlearn? I think it's pretty self-evident at this point, but I'll give you a personal anecdote. A few years ago, in 2022, I tore my ACL, which is a ligament in the knee. It's a very common injury. But for that, I had to get a reconstructive surgery, and after that, I was rehabilitating. And post-surgery, a few months later, I had a consultancy with my doctor. And he told me that I had this condition called lag. So my leg wouldn't fully straighten. And that was a problem, obviously. I had to fix it. So, but then what he said after that was, it's ingrained into my brain, because I promised you these were his exact words, and I quote, "Your leg had to unlearn basic movements like walking in order to relearn it with a fixed ACL, because it used that to cope with the torn ACL." So unlearning was an important part to relearn walking, right? But unlearning isn't just limited to physical action. It's more commonly read or talked about when concerning mental growth. For example, if you think you're not good at mathematics, you grew up believing that, you would have to unlearn that belief in order to be able to open up a wider range of maybe career options. So it's not correct to just say, oh, I'm not good at maths. You haven't tried. It's like you've lost before you tried. Now, when should we unlearn? That, I would say, is the most important part, even more than actually the process of unlearning itself. Because identifying that you have to unlearn is the first step, and I would say half of the problem. This famous guy called Charles Kettering, he once said that a problem well stated is half solved. And what he meant was terming an issue into simpler and uncomplicated terms for you to understand solves half of the issue. It's like a math word problem. So if there's a word problem, you would have to first make those into numericals and symbols into an equation. The second part is the easier part, which is the calculation. So I'll give you a few key scenarios where you should try considering unlearning. The first is when you're encountering new information. So maybe you've read something in a textbook and it's different from what you knew before. So you'd have to unlearn the previous knowledge and then relearn the new one. The second scenario is when you're adapting to a new environment. That may be getting into a new job. You might be friendlier with the other employees or shifting to a new city. The third is breaking free of unhealthy habits. Now, I think this is self-explanatory and most commonly used unlearning for, so I'll not go into details. The fourth is a little different. It's when your current methods stop working. And this is different because your previous method might not be wrong per se. It just was not working for you. It was not suitable for you. For example, let's say you're trying to lose weight and you've been intermittent fasting. And it's known to be very strenuous in the body. So it might not be suitable for you. Instead, you can try like a Paleolithic diet or a keto, any of that. That's still changing your method in order to keep moving. So you'd have to unlearn a previous one. But it doesn't stop there. What if these diets don't work for you? You'd have to continue. It's like a chain. It's try until you succeed, basically. Now, the fifth scenario, and the most important one, is when you've got limiting beliefs. And this is the hardest to identify because it's the belief that's limiting you from even identifying that you should change that belief. For example, flat earthers, they thoroughly believe that the earth is flat no matter what kind of proof they show. Like the sun is setting from that line, therefore earth is flat. Even though we now know that's not, right? I'll tell you this story that happened a couple of weeks ago, actually. A friend of mine from the bus, that day our school had taken our grade to this cow shed farm place where we fed cows and all of that. And when I came back, got on the bus, this friend of mine was panting. He needed water, so I gave him my water. But what he didn't know was that I had a cold, and when I have a cold, I boil the water in clove, so the water turns yellowish orange. He drank the water, and he's asking me why does it taste like that? Why is it that color? And why is it hot? Being the way I am, I just told him it's cow's urine. And I don't know, not in a million years, I thought he would believe that, but he actually believed it, like full on, because his eyes were tearing up, his face was turning red. He even stopped the bus and went outside and puked 3 times and came back. And I sit at the very back of the bus, but then after that, he sat at the very front of the bus. And the next day, he comes and tells me he puked again at home twice. So this, you guys, is the placebo effect. He had this limiting belief that he drank cow's urine, and it prevented him from assessing logically the situation, which was a complete and utter lie by me. So that limited him from actually evaluating if that was a suitable reaction for him, right? So don't be like this guy. You should think second time for everything you've heard, right? Now, I've gone on about when to unlearn. We shall discuss how to unlearn, and it's very simple, okay? The first step we've already done in detail, identifying. So we've identified. Now the second step is to challenge that belief that you've identified and replace the older patterns or habits that you have with new ones. So when I started playing the keyboard when I was 5 years old. I was a kid. I don't really remember much from that. I probably learned Happy Birthday and that's all. So then years later, I tried to self-learn. I thought maybe I'll self-learn, it'll be nice, all of that. And I did, but I learned the chords wrong. So I played the chords with my thumb, index, and ring. And anyone who knows how to play knows that those are the wrong fingers. So then someone told me that I was wrong, and then I had to unlearn these habits and play with the correct fingers. And obviously, like, it felt wrong. It felt like I was playing the keyboard wrong. It just felt uncomfortable. Which brings me to my third step, which is you have to accept and even embrace that sometimes it's fine to feel uncomfortable, because that means that you're improving. You know, to improve is to change, and to be perfect is to keep changing, because the world is ever evolving. Now the fourth step, last step, or often overlooked, is reflection. Because people think that, okay, if you've done something, you might not have been perfect at it, but you have to evaluate what went right and wrong so that you can improve on your second time, on your future endeavors, right? So reflection is an important step. Now, unlearning, it doesn't just apply to personal growth. It affects society majorly as well. Especially in a world where misinformation spreads so fast, we have to learn to critically think, question what we hear, and be open to all kinds of new ideas. Like, I think we've all noticed that a lot of the times in maybe corporate environments, or even schools sometimes, that the environment is toxic. Like social hierarchy, there's a system which is extremely toxic. So we all should try to unlearn these biases or prejudices that we might have that's creating this system, so that we can create a society where everyone's open to share their own perspectives without having any fear. So in conclusion, unlearning and learning are like two sides of a coin. They coexist. One doesn't exist without the other. So I challenge you to take up something to unlearn, question that belief or assumption, and just do it. You don't know what you might discover. And never, ever, ever forget the words of Alvin Toffler. Because he said the illiterate of the 21st century aren't the ones who can't read or write, but rather the ones who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. Thank you.